I don't know why. Well, I cannot. Okay. If anyone else is looking to rock out to music, putting your head back and forth really fast, not a good idea. So for those just listening to Spotify, you're so confused right now because you can't see us rocking out. But anyway, welcome to another edition of the Ben and Ryan Show, where our goal every week is to get right down to the point and tell you guys exactly what's on the show in the first 3 minutes. At least the first 3 minutes. I'll tell you what we're talking about today. So this week we have Peter Amiri with us. He is, I guess, what is your role with? I almost said CF Wheels, but it's just Wheels now.
Yeah.
So is it architect? Is it?
I'm
owner?
the current maintainer.
Okay.
So as open source projects go, you have a maintainer, and hopefully you have an ecosystem of people committing code to the open source project. So I'm the current maintainer.
Okay. And this is the artist formerly known as CF Wheels. And so let's actually, for anyone who does not know what Wheels is, can you give us just a quick rundown of what it is, kind of maybe some origins?
I'll throw some acronyms at you. So, it is a framework for the CFML language. Some of its tenets are MVC, model view controller. You can get into separation of concerns. So you have your model, which is your data layer. You have your controller, which is the conductor that shuffles the requests back and forth, and you have your view layer, which is your templates. The framework is very opinionated, and it is convention over configuration. If you guys think back to the early days of frameworks for CFML, we had a lot of XML configuration we had to do to even get a thing to start working.
Well, sorry, and just to give people a sense of the timeline here, Wheels just had its 20-year anniversary, so it's been around a good stretch.
Yeah, and it was inspired. I mean, the full name and why it was shortened was ColdFusion on Wheels, and that was modeled after the Ruby on Rails era. So Ruby on Rails came on the scene about 2004-ish, I want to say 2003, 2004-ish. And the community around Wheels started thinking about, how can we bring this to the CFML world? And in those early days, it was ColdFusion on Wheels, then shortened to CF Wheels. And then we went through, 17 years of multiple engines being available, and ColdFusion referring to the engine as well as the language. And I actually at one point, and these are all searchable, I found a email thread on a Google Groups form dated 2008 that I had recommended at the time that we dropped the CF from the name.
You were ahead of your time.
So nearly 17 years to get there.
And he's like, you know what? I'm maintainer now. We're going to do this.
It actually took me 3 years to realize I'm the maintainer. I can do this now.
Well, and it's funny because when I first heard of Wheels, which was quite a number of years ago, I had thought that Chris Peters had created it. Mm-hmm. And then just yesterday, I happened across a video. I was doing a Google search for something Wheels related, and I came across a video from Michaela Light on the CF Alive podcast, an interview, I think back in January. And they were saying that Chris Peters only came on because the guy who created it left the ColdFusion community to go do PHP or something.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I didn't even know. It's like it even predated him. That's so funny.
Yeah. So it has, I mean, just like any other open source project, there's been a lot of different people that have come in and out of the project. It's been maintained and kept going, expanded throughout the years by a cohort of very dedicated set of individuals. And the framework has stood the test of time because of their, work and dedication. And I'm more than immensely grateful for their effort to keep the framework going. I'm hoping when I took stewardship of it about 2023. So the current crew that was maintaining it throughout the early 2020s, they just got burnt out, and they wanted to step away. And we had just, in my day job, adopted Wheels as the framework to do our e-commerce platform prior to that. So we had, in 2020, we released our new platform, which was based on Wheels, and we're happy as a clam. And here I hear, all of a sudden that the maintainers are stepping away. And from my perspective, I didn't want the project to suffer and kind of go away because we had a vested interest. So, and I was already working with the team working on the CLI, and Ben's heard me tell the story. So I had an idea where I would write a Wheels book, and Ben knows from someone who has written a book what it's a lot of work. Yeah, it's like when you get this idea, it's such a doable thing, and then you start getting into it, and it's like, oh my god!
And that was back before AI. Well, now it's like writing a book. You're like,
a little bit easier,
right.
But you fall off.
ChatGPT, you write the first draft of it, and I'll edit.
So the idea was, I would like to write a Wheels book. I reached out to a gentleman who had a very, very influential book on Rails and say, hey, do you mind if I model my book off of yours? And he said, no, more power to you. Go for it. So I was appreciative of that, got a copy of his source, and the very first page of every Rails book you pick up is like, okay, jump into the CLI, issue this command that created your app, issue this command that generated a migration file, issue this command that ran the migration. There you go. You got your blog in 5 minutes. I'm like, okay, none of that tooling is in Wheels. So every time I would start one of these projects of, okay, let me write this chapter, let me write this thing, I would go off on the weeds of, adding another round of capability to the CLI or adding another thing. And that kind of put me in contact with the gentleman that was the maintainer of the project. So we were working on the CLI, and I was submitting code to the CLI. So when I heard this was all going down in 2023, that they were stepping away, I kind of said, okay, I'll step up. I may not be the one that's committing a lot of code to the framework, but I'll put structure around it. And some of the stuff we did and very early on was, there was a backlog of bugs that had been fixed and features that have been fixed that hadn't gotten pushed out. So got a new version, moved the discussions onto GitHub discussion board, set up a sponsor me type of where people can support the project. A lot of moving something as simple as moving the docs into the repo. So when you're submitting a pull request, you can submit changes as well as documentation changes in one pull request. My whole take was, because I had this idea of, how can I write a book or how can I introduce this framework to new people? From the get-go, my thing was, reducing friction. How can we make it so people can come in and be productive right away? And that's, we have developers that are going to use the framework to just build applications. We have potentially contributors. How easy is it for them to safely contribute code and know that the code they're contributing actually passes? So you don't get into a scenario where somebody takes their own time, their own free time, submits a piece of code to you, but it doesn't pass any of the tests, and you end up not accepting it. So that puts a negative connotation, and instead of being a positive feedback loop and getting more people involved, you're actually dissuading people from trying to help you in the project. So that's kind of how the whole thing came about.
One of the nice things from my perspective, because I'm historically not a big open source contributor. I write stuff, but I've never. There's always
open source.
Yeah, but it always feels like there's a really big lift to somehow getting into the mindset of how a project works. But I know from some of the behind the scenes stuff that you've shown me, they have a very robust testing and build mechanism that runs in GitHub Actions. It's GitHub Actions, right? No, or
no, it is. Yeah.
So like, I love that as an idea, because it's like technically I wouldn't even have to do any testing locally. Like I could just push a commit and just see if the build fails. It feels like I don't have to have a whole ecosystem running locally.
Yeah, and right now, as we speak and as we record this, I've broken some of these things because I'm working on the 2.0. But we have it such that the test mechanism or test pipeline runs on every PR commit.
Okay.
So when you submit a PR, it will run the entire matrix of tests, and we currently test against Lucy 5, Lucy 6, Lucy 7 is experimental, where we're passing, but we're not marking it as stable. And then on the Adobe side, we're testing against Adobe 2018, 2021, 2023, and 2025 is experimental still for us. But then each of those on the Lucy side, we test against the H2 built-in database, which is a memory file-based database, akin to SQLite, but not quite SQLite. It's Java-driven. And then we test against MySQL, SQL Server, Postgres, and we just recently turned on Oracle because the code was there, and now that we have a test suite, we can turn it on.
Now, are there plans to support Boxlang, or is the idea that Box will be more supported by ColdBox?
No. So personally, and in my day job, we're supporters of Boxlang. We're foundation supporters, whatever they call it or whatever. But very early on, we tried to use it, and some of the things that we needed to get it to work weren't there. So we just said, okay, let's put this on the back burner. I know Boxlang has shipped now with their stable 1.0, and now they're up to 1.3, I think.
Only like a month or two ago, though. I believe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we have such a huge lift to get 3.0 out the door. So from my perspective, I said, okay, let's just concentrate on getting what I need to do and what I want to do with 3.0 and get that out the door. And some of the architectural changes that I'm still doing to the project to make it easier for people to still come in. And then once that's out the door, I suspect Boxlang is just going to be adding another configuration to our pipeline, because I think the engine and the compatibility module for them has matured enough that I suspect we can be able to drop it in and it'll just work. So it won't be a big deal.
So I kind of probably represent some of the CFML community out there who is not in the MVC adoptions. Yep. And so I'm looking at this, I'm like, hey, why would I even get into a framework? Like like sell me on the benefits of implementing any of them. And we'll go into some of the differences between the different frameworks in a minute, but just in general, why frameworks?
So when you're doing a hobby app or just putting a web page together and stuff like that, CFML is, as a environment, as a language, is so approachable, and that's probably why a lot of us back in the day, loved it and came on board. And in my early consulting career, it wasn't unheard of for me to be called because the secretary had built something and now they could maintain it or something like that. I mean, CFML, we take it for granted, but it's very approachable for non computer science and non-programmers to start doing something in. So that's kind of, if you take that model, whenever you're building an application, you have a set of decisions to make. And each of those decisions will have ramifications on how you structure your code, what your directory structure is, how you do something. And that's great if you're the only one that's going to use that code base, and this is the only time you're ever going to have to remember what to do. But even yourself coming back to the code base 6 months later, you may not remember where things are at. And what a framework, if nothing else, gives you is a structured way of organizing your files and your applications. So it makes it such that you have to make less decisions. And I said up front, Wheels is an opinionated framework. It means it will say, put your applications in these directory structures. If you do that, and if you abide by those guidelines, then it will hook things up for you automatically. Yeah. But by using a framework, any framework, what that allows is you can onboard new developers onto your project much simpler, because there's a defined structure to the project. You don't have to sit down with the new onboardee and walk them through what your idea was when you did this. It's like, hey, okay, here's the framework docs. This is how we do it. If you know that framework, then great, you can be onboarded really quickly. If you don't know that framework, it's at least an easier way to learn and come on board to a new project. So those are, generic reasons why frameworks are in existence. Most frameworks try to alleviate the burden on the developer to do a lot of boilerplate, redundant work, and hopefully they are adding value and speeding up the development process and making, Rails's motto is, developer happiness. If the framework is making you unhappy and getting in your way, yeah, why use it?
All right, so Peter, I'm going to put Ben on the spot here for a quick second.
Well, I do want to just add one other thing too, which is the benefit of a framework is oftentimes that it gives the greater community a target to code for, meaning it's easier to build plugins for a framework than it is to build a piece of functionality that both stands on its own and can be easily integrated into any framework. So like I know Rails has huge plugin, they have gems, right, that they can install, and Wheels has plugins. ColdBox, has like a bazillion plugins. When we install Wheels during our deployment, it actually comes out of ForgeBox, right? So it's ForgeBox is from Ortus Solutions as their sort of plugin repository. And so that's just one of the other things that it just gives people something that they can sort of coalesce around in terms of how we're going to build not just the core framework itself, but then the ecosystem that feeds into the framework.
All right, Ben, I'm going to put you on the spot here for a second from what Peter said, is that he mentioned when new developers come on board for a project, it makes the learning curve easier. And I know you guys work together, so there could be some bias, but Ben,
no, so this is the first time.
Is what Peter said true?
Well, so it's interesting because one, I am not historically a huge framework person. I just don't have a ton of frameworks. Most of my stuff is just little homegrown things. Like Peter's saying, ColdFusion is a very accessible language and kind of a little small framework in and of itself. It has a whole eventing life cycle, and requests get handled through a similar, a centralized pipeline and all this stuff. And you can really, but all of these other frameworks, Wheels, ColdBox, everything else, they're basically tapping into the mini framework that ColdFusion provides out of the box. So I have a very strong understanding of how ColdFusion works and how requests generally route. So it's easy for me to follow how things are happening. The uphill battle for me jumping into any new framework, and I don't think this is Wheels specific, is that you don't know what you don't know. So when you're trying to figure out how you want to, at work, I always use the term cutting against the grain or cutting with the grain. You know, like, am I doing something in quote unquote the Wheels way, or am I doing something the wrong way, making it harder for myself just because this is the way I've maybe historically thought about things? So I'll hit some sort of an edge that I don't, an edge of my understanding, and I don't know, is my misunderstanding because I have to go back to the documentation? Is the misunderstanding because I'm using it the wrong way? Or is my misunderstanding because I want to use a feature that doesn't necessarily exist, or a pattern that hasn't really been established yet in that particular community? I will say, to Wheels' accolades here, they have pretty incredible documentation and very, very robust. I mean, it's like a book unto itself. And printed
out PDF, I think it's in the 500 to 600 pages.
Yeah, wow. It's intense. It's intense. And when I joined PAI, the first thing I did was I spent like 3 days or something just reading through the documentation. I was like, oh, I'll knock this out in an afternoon. And then I think it took me the better part of a week. And
so has it made it easier? Like I guess one of the goals was the framework to provide the ease for people to come onboarding.
So as Peter was saying, it follows a bunch of idioms that already exist in the framework world. It's has ORM, it has models, it generally lives on top of the core ColdFusion functionality. So that stuff I found relatively easy to get comfortable with right away. There's some stuff that is not quite like some of the other frameworks. Some of the other frameworks are much heavier on dependency injection and inversion of control. And Wheels does a little, let's call it like, what's the phrase? Like killing sacred cows. There's a lot of, there's the biggest thing is there's basically a global namespace that a lot of things can live in. So if you think of your model view controller as being sort of three separate areas of like three separate boundaries, you have functions that can sort of just co-mingle into these different spaces. And when I first saw that, it felt very foreign to me because so much of everything else has been very, very hard on encapsulation. But the thing, like, sometimes it just feels really good, actually. It's basically part of the magic of the Wheels mechanics is that it just makes a lot of these things available in all of these execution contexts. So a lot of times you'll look at a language and it has some limitation and you're like, oh, wouldn't it be great if I could just add this function? And historically in other frameworks, you can do that, but you have to do it by creating a component and adding some functions to it and then injecting it or requiring it. And then you can use these namespace functions. And that's great when it's I'd say like a really specialized type of API, but there's so many APIs that we use in like every part of the application, like encoding HTML or rendering a button or including another function or including another template and giving it some arguments, where you're like I do this so often, I don't want it to be specialized. I want it to just be part of the landscape of the execution context. And it's been really nice, actually. That's pushed me outside my comfort zone because it's just not how I've done things, but it's actually made me reevaluate like how sacred that is to me. Because now I feel like I want to go into my other applications and create an E function that does the encode for HTML, because I'm just so sick and tired of typing encode for HTML, right? So the flip side to that coin is, of course, you now are living in a sort of flat global namespace. So you do have to worry about naming collisions. But this is like another interesting thing. I'm just rambling now, sorry. But like, this is another really interesting thing. I'm just doing stream of consciousness here. So Wheels is very opinionated. However, it's also very flexible. So Peter talked about how I'm hitting these edges and I want to change the way something works. The way Wheels populates these global execution contexts is it really will only inject these functions if you don't already have something of the same name. So if I say, I don't like the fact that this function has a weird default for the timestamp that it takes, like it's taking it in my server time, not in UTC time or something, I can just define my own function of the same name and basically override that functionality within the application. So it allows me to augment and experiment and tweak. And sometimes I'll go to Zane, who's a guy on the team who does a lot of the Wheels maintenance as well. I'll go and say, hey, Zane, I'm trying this. I really think the wheel should work this way. And sometimes he's like, no, that's crazy. And then sometimes he'll be like, yeah, that's a great idea. And then he'll just have a bug fix pushed to a production 2 days later.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I have a question for Peter then, kind of in some of this, because in my prep for the show, I was looking over some of the information about the Wheels framework and the history, and it being kind of inspired by Ruby on Rails. Yeah. And even mentioned that being CF on Wheels when it first came. Why the decision at PAI to adopt this framework in the beginning as opposed to like a Framework One or ColdBox?
It really comes down to me and my prior experience. So initially, when I joined PAI, my initial concentration was just infrastructure cleanup and upgrade. There's some deficiencies there, and we spent the first few years of my tenure there just cleaning up and setting up the infrastructure. And I came from a hosting background, so I knew data centers, and I kind of set up the operations that way. And then we started concentrating on application layer, and when I joined, I was the only CF guy on the team. I inherited some developers that knew PHP and a proprietary, less known language, even less known than CFML. Initially, we wanted to do the e-commerce application, and the e-commerce application said, okay, what's the biggest e-commerce platform out there? We said Magento. Magento is a PHP platform. I have a PHP developer. Great. We went to a Magento conference, got hooked up with some Magento consultants that were going to help us. And, a year and a half into that project, we're still dealing with page load times in the 3.5 to 15 seconds. And that really comes down to the single-threaded nature of the PHP engine. There's no way, as you scale your applications larger and larger, it falters. A few straws on the camel's back, eventually I threw up my hand and said, this is untenable. Our ERP system is, like I mentioned, a very homegrown system, very legacy, but that platform has a JDBC driver. And we just basically took a week to say, hey, can we get access to this ERP data that's our system of record through a JDBC instance? And we found that, hey, if we make what to ColdFusion looks like it's a stored procedure call, we're actually instantiating a program in this environment if we go through the JDBC driver. So that was our communication mechanism, and we hit the ground running. I wanted to build the system, but I didn't have the time to do all the programming myself. So I reached out to my community. My community was the Wheels community. And I said, hey, does anybody have some time that they could do consulting? And Per, who was the maintainer of CF Wheels for several years during the early years, said, yeah, I do. So he came on board, spent about 6 months doing consulting for us to get the project off the ground. When he left, at that point, I took over as the main developer, and then I realized, okay, I can't do this and do my CTO role at the same time. So we brought on more Wheels developers, or more CFML developers, and trained our in-house people in CFML, and that has worked for us. Now, why Wheels? Because I knew the technology. We recently started. This is, so the e-commerce site is out. 2020 we pushed that out, so it's mature enough and it's out there. And we were starting a brand new project, and with that one I toyed with, should I use another framework? And when it came down to it, go ahead.
If I could jump in and just be less diplomatic, because I'm not the boss. Right. So we had this same conversation at the very beginning of Envision 15 years ago. We were about to build a new product, or we were about to take a proof of concept product and flesh it out into something real. And Clark and I sat down and said, okay, version 1 was written in CFML. Is it crazy to even try to do version 2 in CFML, or should we move to a hotter framework at the time? Ruby on Rails was like really having a moment back in like the early 2010s. We're like, should we rewrite this whole thing in Ruby on Rails? We'll have this huge ecosystem of developers. And we sat and thought about it for a day or two, and we came to the conclusion that that would be crazy, because at the end of the day, we would have no idea whether or not the code was any good. That we were all ColdFusion experts, and at the end of the day, we had to know, if a developer says I can't do this, or it's taking too long, or it's performance issues, like our BS meter is finely tuned, to that world. And if someone was to write Ruby on Rails code and say, hey, it's not working, or it's not performant enough, I'd be like, I don't know, maybe that's just how Ruby on Rails works. I don't know.
Yep.
So for us, it was the technology, lets me, remove that fog of war and really lean on the deep expertise to focus on the things that I know are possible. And I'm not going to speak for Peter here, but I imagine it
is the same thing. I mean, it's at the end of the day, I want to make sure the technology stack is still something I can jump into, and provide some value, and maybe steer a particular feature a certain way. If the technology was completely inaccessible to me, and I'm getting up there in my years, for me to learn a new tech stack is a little bit asking.
If Ben can do it,
yeah. Well,
it's still ColdFusion.
That's true.
So that's why I chose Wheels. I mean, the ecosystem that I could tap into was Wheels. The reason we chose it for the first project, and the reason we entertained other frameworks for the second project, but it still went back to Wheels, was the same thing. We have an ecosystem, we have developers, and we have a project already in that. Didn't make sense to shift gears, and now people have to do the mental shift every time they go from one project to another. It makes sense.
Now, so in my research again for today, because I didn't really know too much about it, so I was talking to people, and I heard that the Rails community are rather opinionated.
Mm-hmm.
That their way is good, and partly because they get bashed on a lot, so they've got to kind of like the ColdFusion community. They got to have their guards up when they hear is ColdFusion dead. So very similar, but Rails has a certain way. I'm sure Wheels has certain ways of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And as Ben was talking about, it is a little bit different thought process than more traditional MVCs.
Yeah.
Is what does adoption look like or migration, or adoption look like for a new company then when they're coming on board? So if someone else is evaluating it and didn't have that Wheels background or Rails background, and they're looking at frameworks, does that add any friction to them, where they would look at a different platform, or what would you advise? Are there people out there, consultants, that you'd say bring on board because the benefit is the benefit 6 months from now is far greater than doing something like a Framework One? Not to bash Framework One.
No. And we'll talk. I mean, maybe we should step back and just talk about the way I view the three frameworks. I mean, we have basically three frameworks in the ColdFusion community that are maintained right now. We have Framework One, we have ColdBox, we have Wheels. And the way I view it is Framework One is on the one end of the spectrum, ColdBox is on the other end of the spectrum, and Wheels is somewhere in the middle. And Framework One is very, very light. And in fact, I mean, it's in the name. It was initially
one component
that you dropped in, and that was it. So what that means is it doesn't come with a whole lot of batteries. You know, we say, you know, Wheels is everything, you know, it's a framework with batteries included type of thing. So if all you want is to get a directory structuring capability built in and stuff like that, Framework One brings that to the table, gives you a structured how to structure your code. So you gain some of those benefits of having a framework, having a defined structure, so multiple developers know where to go instead of having to ask the first guy, you know, where did you, I can't find this code, I can't find this file, where'd you hide it, you know, type of thing. So that's the way I view Framework One. On the other end of the scale, with ColdBox is a very mature product with a enormous amount of firepower behind it. Ordis has done wonderful things for the CFML community. And they have put a lot of that product has probably advanced more than any other framework in the CFML community. And with that rapid advancement, they've created a product that is very robust, very enterprise focused, and has, like Ben mentioned, has a plethora of modules you can choose. And sometimes even getting to the point of, okay, I want to use an ORM for this. Well, there's probably 4 different ORMs you can use with ColdBox. Which one do you, you know? So those are the types of things that, you know, you get on the higher end of the scale. And then Wheels kind of slips in the middle and says, okay, we've got everything included. And if you're okay with going and programming the way we think you should, then you'll be fine. And guess what? I mean, as Ben alluded to, you can deviate a little bit. You know, you can customize a little bit.
Like,
go ahead.
So one of the things, I feel like I bring a fresh perspective to Wheels because I'm just not familiar with it. So it's forcing me to challenge my own assumptions, but then I think it also forces the Wheels people to challenge their assumptions because I run into like, I don't understand why it works this way. So one of the things that Wheels provides out of the box is a routing system. You know, someone requests this URL and that URL maps onto a controller and the controller maps onto a view, etc. And Wheels has a very opinionated way to think about gets and posts and puts and deletes and patches. And like, I just don't think that way. And so what I would like to do, because this is how I've always developed applications, I will often have a form post back to the same URL. And then it kind of like in the oldest of old school ColdFusions, where you have just your processing logic at the top of your view. And you're like, if the form is populated, do some stuff with it. Like that actually turns out to be like a pretty convenient way to think about data processing. Yep. So there was no sense in the Wheels router of saying this URL accepts both a post and a get without actually defining it twice. So Wheels has a resource, I think it's called Mapper, internally, and you can just go into it, or I could just go into it. I'm just going to add a new function to this Mapper object, and it's going to be called postback, and it's just going to do nothing but do the get and the post internally. And now when I'm defining all my routes, I can use this postback, which so it's like there's all these. It's very opinionated, but it's also extremely extensible because one, it has hooks built into how you do things, but then it's also built on top of ColdFusion. And ColdFusion is in and of itself an extremely flexible runtime environment. You can just add functions, remove functions, move stuff around. It's pretty crazy. I forget how I got onto this. Sorry.
I think we're talking about some of the differences between the frameworks.
Yeah. And I mean, we can get into like the differences and whether the ecosystem is big enough for 3 frameworks. I mean, this is something that comes up a lot as well. And it's like, I think the 3 frameworks have completely different philosophies, and they lend themselves to different types of projects. And I don't mean that by size. You know what I mean? I mean, our first Wheels project is doing hundreds of millions of dollars in transactional annually. It's doing nice. Thousands, tens of thousands, if not. I think on a monthly basis, we're doing over 1.5 million searches on our search engine. That's quite a bit on a daily basis, So it's big, and it's not. So I'm not talking about if you have more than X number of developers, or if you have more than X number of pages, you need to go to one framework or another. It's just different frameworks have different philosophies, and some of that might be akin to what you want to do. So that's the way I view the landscape, and having the 3 mature frameworks is actually a good thing for the CFML ecosystem. Mm-hmm. It shows the viability of the ecosystem, and it shows that there's the the competition, friendly competition between the frameworks. We learn from each other. We use tools, and we stand on each other's shoulders. I mean, part of the 3.0 push that we're doing with Wheels, we're adopting Wirebox and TestBox. The box testing framework for CFML, Wirebox dependency injection. And when we do that, then it makes it easier for us to do other things. One of the things I'm looking at and considering is whether the CB wire module is now viable for Wheels. So what is CB wire? CB wire is an attempt to take Livewire, which is a framework written for Laravel, which is a PHP framework, and CB wire has brought that technology to ColdFusion, and it works within the ColdBox community. But because that's layered on top of Wirebox, and we now have Wirebox in Wheels, we can utilize that same technology in Wheels. So I'm investigating what are the mechanisms that we would do that? Is there a benefit to do that and stuff like that? So we can learn from each other. We can build on top of each other's act, and at the end of the day, it's better for the community to have multiple options.
It's kind of like Lucy and ACF and now Boxline out there, kind of pushing each other to be better at this.
But it's fascinating, again, to me, coming in with fresh eyes and having historically been a consumer of Framework One. So Framework One, Peter was saying, is very, very lightweight. But one thing that it does have is dependency injection, and Wheels handles dependency injection a little differently in that you don't inject things into components, more like there are these global accessors for models and controllers. Mostly models. The controller stuff is really handled for you implicitly by the routing system. But models, in the Wheels parlance, are really wrappers around databases, database records. But there's stuff that you want to do that doesn't really feel like it's a database record. That there is a cohesive set of functionality that you sort of just want a namespace and and you don't want it to necessarily have a save method to persist to a database. And so this is something that I've been struggling to reconcile. And just this morning, as an example, I created a method called service. So if you wanted to load a database record or create an empty database holder, you would call this model method, and you give it a class name, and it instantiates it for you or pulls it out of a cache and it gives it to you. And what I wanted to do was create a service method that does the same thing, but creates a much lighter weight object that doesn't have all the model database methods. And like, this is one of those things where you're sort of fighting the uphill battle because you don't know how the framework works at a deep level yet. And just after digging through how models get created, how controllers get created, I ended up creating a service method that is literally just a double check lock around a cache, and it creates a component and then gives it to you, which is basically what dependency injection does. I'm sort of just calling it from the other end. But because Wheels has all these hooks for how you can load things, I create this service method in one place, and now every part of my application has access to it. And if I want to get the barcode generator, I just say service barcode, or if I want to get the error logger, I say service error logger, and it just gives me the cached instance. So it's one of those things where it doesn't quite look like it might in other frameworks, but the extensibility and the functionality is there. You just have to figure out how to use it, which is the same when you're coming to anything that you've never used before.
So, Peter, I know you, as a maintainer, you guys have talked about the documentation, and I read through one of the PDF you created, or I don't know if it's going to be what it's going to turn out to be, but it's kind of a comparison of CF Wheel, or sorry, Wheels.
The way I tell people is, we're used to the 3-syllable acronym type thing, CF Wheels. So I say wheels.dev. That's
okay. That's wheels.dev.
Yeah. If you want the 3, just do it that way.
I forgot where my question was going now.
The comparison between the frameworks.
we're talking about the comparison of the frameworks, and we have Framework One, and we talked about that. I mean, the lightweight one, and ColdBox out there. Because there's things that ColdBox does that they're just, because it's so feature rich, and for people doing some of these applications, you need that.
Yeah.
Does it make sense for people who don't need that quite yet to adopt wheels.dev for Wheels, and are there people who end up upgrading to ColdBox at some point because they need something, or do they end up just expanding with their application, writing their own pieces to do just the key pieces that ColdBox may do?
Yeah. I think anytime you have to retool your application, it's a painful process. So just because the 2 frameworks are both CFML based doesn't mean it's going to be an easy process to go from one to the other. So that you have to take into consideration. Could you reuse a lot of your model logic, or probably, since underneath the hood they're all written in CFML. I would look at it a different way, and I think both ColdBox and Wheels have been around similar amount of time. I think ColdBox just they do their 17th year anniversary or 19th or something like that. But they're 2 mature frameworks. As long as the framework that you want to choose gives you the capabilities that you need today, that's the one I would go with. And I wouldn't go with any of them with the notion that I'm going to change to the other, because if you think you're going to need the capabilities of the other, start with the other, because switching and retooling your application is a painful process, regardless of how akin they might be. 2 model view controller frameworks going from one to the other, it's still going to be, learning curve. So I would recommend to people to, make sure that capabilities that you need are there and the way you want to program is handled, and then choose the one you want. From a maintainer perspective, what I am trying to do with Wheels is try to make it such that the ColdFusion or CFML isn't the albatross across our neck. Try and make it such that it's a robust enough framework, and it's approachable enough, and it has functionality akin to or even better than the Laravel's and Rails out there, to be able to be a viable alternative. This is we're gonna jump off the bandwagon here, but Ben knows I've been playing around with AI models and agentic coding. And how do you get, and it's remarkably, right now, these AI models are remarkably good at writing ColdFusion code. You
Really?
wouldn't think so, because we're such a small community, but our language is so ECMAScript based, so C-like, that it can do a very good job, most of these models, at writing CFML. Where it kind of falls apart is like, Wheels has a DB migration mechanism. DB migration isn't something that is, distinct to Wheels. There's all kinds of DB migrations out there. So if I tell an AI agent to write me a DB migration file for CF Wheels, user controller or user object, it'll probably give me code right out of the bat that doesn't run in Wheels. It's good CF code, but it assumes that you're using the DB migration module that is on ForgeBox rather than the DB migration module in Wheels. It has those types.
Have you fed it documentation on Wheels to help it, and that does not help at all?
No, it does. Where I've done a deep dive in the past few weeks and if not months is, what do I need to teach it? And this whole thing is, when you start getting into this realm, and we're way off of Wheels, but you start talking about.
We may have to put a pin in this one to bring Peter back again or something, or talk about AI. I mean, AI is a hot topic around here, but
exactly
all the RAG stuff around it.
So where I was going with this is, these AI models are going to continually advance. And they will probably advance to the point where we'll be able to request an AI agent to write applications for us. And I still say, I caveat that. I'm not saying that it's going to replace developers, because the only reason I can do it is because I know. No, I'm serious. The only reason I'm able to do this is because I know where it's gone off the rails.
Right.
No pun intended.
No pun intended.
I can say, hey, you're stop. That's not right. We should be able to do it this way. And it'll often come back. Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. That's a better approach. And it'll go off and do something. So as a developer, you can guide it to build things for you, and you can taking the analogy of the framework brings a lot of tools to the developer, so the developer doesn't have to do a bunch of things themselves. This is like one step even further, where you could ask the AI agent to build applications for you. And I think that's just going to continue to advance.
Yeah.
If we look into a future of 12 months from now, where these agents have just continually gained capability, we could be in a world where Wheels and CFML might be a viable option for someone. For whatever reason, someone will tell an AI agent, hey, build me blog, but use Wheels. It can do it for you. And what as a maintainer, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to understand, what do I need to put into the framework and the CLI to be able to feed that information back to the model. So
very interesting approach to the framework, is building it for the AI world.
Well,
or AI assisted world, I should say.
Yeah.
I would also just add too, because as I'm getting up to speed on Wheels, I know that it is based on principles from the Ruby on Rails community. So when I'm talking to ChatGPT and I'm asking it, hey, how does something like this get done in the Wheels world? I will say Wheels is a ColdFusion framework that is based on the principles of Ruby on Rails, and ChatGPT will start giving me feedback that, oh, this is how it would be handled in Rails, and here's how that might be translated into the Wheels code. Mm-hmm. So it's helpful to know that this is also based on another community's approach as well.
Yep.
All right, I got a question for Ben. Ben loves these, so I'm not going to ask you to do any kind of headbanging, so you're good there.
All right, safe.
But in the very, very beginning, you had talked about how you may start adding Wheels to some of your side projects that you've done. And so if your side projects probably represent a good amount of legacy code out there mm-hmm. For people, what are with your knowledge right now of Wheels, how would you add that, or what are the steps that you would take to add that into your existing applications that people listening and watching can take away from, to say, okay, hey, if I want to do this, I'm going to start here. I'm going to do X, Y, Z, and then I'm going to, because we talked about, I don't know if we talked about it, but like the views can be existing code. Mm-hmm. So it can run existing code. So is there a process where you do something and then you can go to the views and you can start to tweak little things within the views to start using the Wheels framework, or what would you recommend for those people looking to get into it for some of the first time? And Peter, if you've gone through this with your code, you can chime in as well. But I was interested to hear Ben's take on it.
Yeah. I mean, so it's tough because the framework has a very specific way about thinking about the flow of data through the request processing pipeline. So just to compare it, a very simple thing, if I were in a Framework One application, typically what happens is your controller gets invoked and the controller methods are passed a request context, just a struct. And you put data into that struct, and then that struct gets exposed to the view templates. And so if you want to output a user's first name, it would probably be something like RC for request context .user.firstname. Wheels takes a slightly different approach where the controller object is actually freshly instantiated on every request. And you can sort of treat the entire controller instance as that request context. So instead of storing variables into an RC object, you just store them into the controller, and then the whole controller argument and variable scope is made available to the view templates. And like philosophically, it's basically the exact same thing, but mechanically it's actually fairly different. And it would be hard to take that one view and just lift and shift it into another application.
Now is your stuff you already in Framework One?
I am a series of CF switch statements and CF includes in my little side projects. I'm about as homegrown as it gets.
Yeah. And I may add so anytime you're taking a existing application and you're trying to stand up or migrate to another one, I think, Ben, you've talked about the starvation.
The strangler
pattern. So I was thinking about this because I think you posted this to the email thread that we had going on, and there's probably different ways you can attack this, but perhaps the easiest way, just to say, I moved everything into the framework, is that Wheels has a folder called miscellaneous that actually has its own application.cfc, so it's outside of the scope of the application. So if you put anything into that miscellaneous folder, the framework just stays outside of it. So maybe the easiest thing to do is to take that entire legacy code, drop it into the miscellaneous, so it continues to function. It just, the route changes to it. It becomes miscellaneous and then my application. But everything inside that stays the same as long as you had relative routing within your application. So now you have a framework that surrounds your application, and your application doesn't know anything about it, and the framework doesn't know anything about your application. And then you start carving out pieces of the application that are distinct enough that don't rely on a bunch of other stuff, and then start moving those into the framework. And Ben was describing like the pattern. So when you have a URL, the router for Wheels will come in and say, okay, this is the route that you gave me on the URL. This maps to this controller. So, and this function of this controller. So it looks for a controller, and then it brings up that CFC, and it looks for a method inside that CFC and says, okay, I'm going to run this method. Then at the end of it, if you do nothing, it automatically will call the correspondingly named view file. So it looks for a folder that matches the controller's name, and then it looks for a CFM file that matches the method's name, and it sends that to the browser. So the reason I said it that way is because the controller is actually completely optional. So when the route comes in, it looks for the existence of a controller. If a controller is not there, it just calls the view. So then your view file, there is nothing stopping you from putting a CF query tag in your view file, if that's what you want to do. So what that means is, these pages that I had in my old application, my legacy code, can just become my view pages. The only thing I probably have to worry about is inner linking of these pages, because maybe the URL pattern has changed. So I take 3 pages, bring them over to make them Wheels views, and now how they interrelate to each other, I change the links, and then how they interrelate to the rest of the application changes. So I change those links. You're creating a model where you can start having code in both places. Now, the code you brought over isn't Wheels, it doesn't use the ORM, doesn't use separation of concerns and stuff like that. But that gets your code into the framework. And then you start refactoring that and saying, okay, what can I move into a model? What can I move into the controller? Maybe the first step after that is just taking the control logic, putting it into the controller, and leaving the templating portion in the view. Even before you adopt the ORM, you just move your SQL statements from your view into your controller. So now you have your controller that's doing all the data manipulation and everything, and then you've got your view. And then the next layer after that would be adopting the ORM and actually separating that into its own layer as well. So that's kind of mentally, theoretically, the way I would think about it. Practicality is probably going to be a one-off for every single situation.
Yeah, right. It'd be like trying to build on top of AWS without using any of the AWS specific things. You're like,
there are tons of people who do that.
Yeah,
I know, but then you lose all of the, not all of, but you lose so much of the benefit of everything that AWS is going to bake in to the fact that you're using AWS.
Okay, you're burning cash. I mean, if you don't use the actual AWS functions, you're just burning cash. I mean, but it's funny in the hosting world, we see this where people just lift and shift a server or a VM to AWS. They're like, oh, it's now in AWS. I'm like, no, all you did is add it. You doubled your bill. That's really all you just did. But anyway, I don't want to get into. I can. You all know I can talk about hosting all day. But it would be interesting to see, like, with Peter's kind of experience, when he just kind of laid out as a good path forward for somebody to take somebody like anybody out there. I mean, one of Ben's side projects, or anyone with a small legacy code, and record a video of, okay, hey, this is how and you can even time lapse it so you don't have to do everything in real time. But hey, we're gonna take it and we're gonna do exactly what Peter just walked through. We're gonna first put it to miscellaneous, and you see, look, now it comes up, right? I did do a little bit of rewriting of URLs, and now that step, and kind of step through it and kind of strangle it, where you're removing layers at a time until you get to, you don't realize it, but now your boat's a whole new boat. Yeah.
Right.
There's something interesting to kind of see, just to get people an idea of, hey, yeah, okay, it is as easy as people talk about to make a transition, or not. I shouldn't say that easy. I did spend some time talking with ChatGPT this morning, chatting my buddy about this presentation, and to talk about the difficulties of migrating to each of the platforms. Mm-hmm. And I mean, Framework One and Wheels were about the same difficulty, not difficult, but ColdBox was. I mean, it's a massive. You're doing a lot more to adopt that, so it would be very interesting for you guys to show off how easy it is, or relatively speaking, how easy it is to move to Wheels and give people that peace of mind that, yeah, you know what, let me get into MVC, because it's something that really needs to be, especially in the ColdFusion community. Right. Needs to be adopted by everybody. Is that more current? I hesitate to say even that's more current. I mean, it's really not current.
And I think because CFML is not opinionated in that sense, and because it's so approachable, and we have so much legacy code, that just lends itself to this quagmire that a lot of people in the CFML world don't use frameworks. You know, they roll their own. It's probably the closest thing to that is PHP, because it's been out there long enough that there's a lot of PHP code that's not framework based. But the more modern frameworks, Laravel being the biggest, you know, they've elevated developer experiences, and that's kind of I mean, as a maintainer of this project, that is my number one goal. It's like elevating the developer experience. How the code is architected underneath the hood has been less of a focus for me, because I'm more focused on developer experience, being able to put Wheels on the table when people are considering Laravel versus Rails and less of ColdBox versus Wheels and versus Framework One. Because I feel like if you're already deep in the CFML community and you're coming to the table with one of these biases, I'm not here to try to wean you off of ColdBox. ColdBox is a good framework. It has a tremendous ecosystem. It has a wonderful company behind it. More power to you. You know, if you have a bias towards it, go for it. What I want to be able to do is be in a room with the CTO and say, you can use Rails, you can use Wheels, you can use Laravel. Which do you prefer? And right now, the number one resistance that we would hear is, well, it's hard for me to hire ColdFusion developers. You know, but I bet you 12 to 18 months from now, we're not coding a bunch of these things. We're using our knowledge to architect these things. And some AI models are coding most of our code for us. I just think that's where our industry is going, where we're going to turn more into architects.
Peter just frightened so many people.
I don't say that to frighten people. I just say it because, 2 months ago, if you would have asked me, I'd say, yeah, this is coming. It's not there, blah, blah, blah. But having dove deep into this, I see where it's useful, but I also see where, the AI models right now are geared to give you a question. They are rewarded for having given you a question. That's where hallucinations come in, and them making things up come in, because they've been trained to give you an answer, and they don't know how to give you the answer you want, so they'll just make up an answer for you. Mm-hmm. That's very prevalent in the coding world. I'm very, as we speak, I think Google just released their Gemini Pro.
I saw that
Gemini
today.
code just today or yesterday. So just brand new on the scene is a brand new coding capable AI agent. So I'm very eager to play with that and see where its limitations are. I'll tell you one thing. So I played with Anthropic's Claude model, and I saw them go from the 3.7 to the 4.0 model. I saw it, the level when I went from Claude Sonnet to Claude Opus, which is their more their higher end model, more expensive, but their higher end model. And I've seen how it's done better in answering questions for me and writing code and those types of things. When I installed the Gemini model, the very first thing it did is, let me research this language. It goes out and it just researched CFML before it even came in to do anything. And I think that comes from the Google mindset that they're developers. They've got decades of writing code, and their mindset is, okay, I need to learn the language that you're talking about before I can even be productive in it. So that's why I'm saying these things are just going to continue to get better and better, and be in a position where we can probably dictate what we want it to build for us in the future, and it can do a good job of translating that into functioning code. I don't think we're there yet. I think there's a lot of places where it falls off the rails. I think there's a lot of places where the UI of what it generates is, first grader UI type of stuff. But I could see it happening, and I want to make sure that Wheels has a seat at that table in the future. And that's kind of where I've tried to learn the tools, see what we need to bake into the framework to make it easier for these models to be able to be proficient in them.
So I have an AI question for you, because this has come up before, and on prior podcasts, previous podcasts, whatever the word is. In the future, from what you see, will the actual programming language matter? Or will, as you tell the AI that you want code, will it just pick one that it believes is the best to do the task? And then if you ask it to add more features, it may look at it and completely change it or do something else. And you may have even been on this conversation we had about this. I think when Mark was with us, Mark Takata. Yep. Where do you see that future? Is the actual language going to be that big of an issue in the future?
I think if you extrapolate far enough into the future, then no, the language is irrelevant, and we won't even care. But we have generations of code bases and generations of developers. But we still come to the table with our biases. Like I said, we talked earlier in this podcast about me personally having a bias towards CFML and having a bias towards Wheels, and that's why I picked that as the project. So until people like me in my generation are no longer here, and we have the new generation of coders that really don't have a bias towards anything, and they're just their bias is towards this AI model versus that AI model, doesn't matter what the output is, I just want the functionality. I think that's when it's going to change. But right now, we have ColdFusion's been around for 30 plus years. There's probably code somewhere in the deeps of some governmental office that's been running for 28 years and unchanged. It's
But also, it's important to remember that the technologies that we choose don't exist in a vacuum, meaning that they're being used for specific purposes. So if you're working on a single machine, for example, using something like a SQLite database could be the best solution because it's local and it's super fast. But the moment you have multiple machines that need to be load balanced, well, you can't use SQLite really anymore because you have to have multiple machines agreeing on a database. And then you either have to have a hosted database solution or, some managed sort of situation, or like maybe you need to do stuff in Lambda. Well, Lambda is pretty constrained on to the size of the code that can run in it. So maybe a JVM based language is not the right move there. Maybe a Node.js based language is the right move there. It's like there's still the practicalities of the world in which the software is operating that will put its thumb on the scale, I imagine.
Yeah, and so I don't know, Ryan, where you're coming from. If you're coming from a alarmist perspective that, oh my God, our industry is changing, I don't think it's going to change for the next 25 to 50 years.
Oh, okay. So your future is like way out there.
My future is way out, but I think
Okay.
these AI models are going to continue to advance. So we will be productive in these AI models in the next 24 months, I think. But does that mean that it completely eliminates programming languages? No. Look at how much Ada code is out there, how much Pascal code is out there, how much so languages don't go away because programs don't go away, and especially the ones that are well written, they tend to stick around for a while.
I'm just thinking if you're writing the framework for the AI world, maybe the AI world is like, yeah, you know what? Wheels is the best one. It's already written for us.
Who knows?
Now that becomes a de facto standard.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, I don't think the AI models are doing that. I think we're still telling them, hey, I want a such and such app that does this, and then it goes and builds it in that such and such technology. I don't know what you would get if you say, I want a blog written in XYZ. You'll probably get either a Node app or you'll get a Python app based on where these people are training. A lot of the researchers are training Python. A lot of the front end applications are Node based. Node.js.
This is my biggest fear. It's like the Kim Kardashian effect in my mind, where it's like, what is Kim Kardashian famous for? Like, oh, she's famous for being famous. Like, I couldn't tell you what she's actually famous for.
Yeah.
And it's,
we all know what she was famous for.
Well, I feel like you get into this echo chamber where, exactly to Peter's point, it's like if the AI starts producing React, then what do people learn is React. Then what does the AI learn off of? All of the React code that people are writing. And you don't get a deeply thought through choice. You get just like a middle of the road, and I don't mean that derogatorily. Like, you get a middle of the road. This is what most people have done, so this is what we're going to continue to do because it's the most trained part of our models. And that, I don't know. That seems depressing.
I will tell you though, I was excited when Peter was telling us about how well it's writing CFML code.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that very limitation. And we've talked before about how we're working on an ERP system, which is like not from a performance or any feature base, but it just doesn't have the adoption of a NetSuite out there.
Yeah. And
so there's way more users of it. And so you get sometimes responses back based on some other ERPs.
Yeah.
Their issue, and because I know what this ERP can do, I'm like, oh no, I asked you this question because this was like a little tiny thing that acts differently.
Mm-hmm.
So your answer doesn't work because we've all talked about you need
to have
that domain knowledge.
Ryan, you're right to be confused.
Yeah, there's this notion is, how do we feed information, and at what point, at what level do we feed the information? Can we make it easier for these models to interact? I don't know how much you guys know about MCPs, Model Context Protocol.
Very little.
Yeah.
We're really off the wheels.
I know, this is gonna be 2 podcasts.
Here's welcome to part 2. So MCP is something that was documented and released by Anthropic as a structured way to give context, give information to the AI agents, and that context can be just information, can be code that they can run, it can be capabilities. Think of an MPC. There are MCPs out there that I can install and point it to my SQL server. So now the AI agent that I'm talking to, I can say, go look at the data model and tell me what to do, and it can talk about it. So the MCP protocol just got went gangbusters. Everybody started adopting them. All the models standardize on it. All the developers are creating these MCP servers for it and stuff like that. So now we have this standardized, supported way to feed the models information. And when we're building a ColdFusion application, a Wheels application, typically we CD into the directory, we've got command box installed, we'll say start, it starts up the server. And now we have a running server that the model could potentially talk to. So instead of me feeding all of this text-based information into the context of the model, which, context is limited and you run out of memory and you got to reload and all this other stuff, perhaps I could stand up a MCP server inside my Wheels development environment that the model could always interrogate to get the latest way to do something in Wheels or the latest way to do something in CFML or stuff like that, and be able to give that information to the models. And that's like, I haven't even started. I'm formulating the thought process around that, but that's kind of why I'm doing this. Is like we have a unique environment where you've got an engine running locally, and all I got to do is I've got JSON exports of the Lucy and the CFML
documentation.
I've got JSON exports of my Wheels framework API. I've got all of my markdown files for Wheels. I could feed all of this and make it available to any of the AI agents, and now the agent can interact with this framework and know exactly what to do. You know what I mean? So I think those are the baby steps we're going to see. That not only Wheels, a lot of these frameworks out there, regardless of the platform, regardless of the language, they're going to figure out how to be able to feed information into the models so the models can do the grunt work for us. And leave us to do the architectural pieces and stuff like that. I've done ColdFusion applications where we've got, millions of requests per day, tens of thousands of requests per second. And how do you architect that, and how do you make that actually work? That has nothing to do with the code itself. This is an architectural mindset, and we still need that, and we need to know how to do that. And frankly, as a CTO, someone who's been far removed from coding on a day-to-day basis, this is exciting because it allows me to jump in, do a little bit, and then jump back out and go, okay, now I need to worry about this lease of printers that is coming up for the organization. Then you jump back in and you do a little bit of code and you jump back out.
Peter's like, all right, Ben, the AI just wrote this code. Can you go fix it now?
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because so like Peter said, he's been looking into this AI stuff for a good couple of weeks / months at this point. But when he first tried it, it definitely left some artifacts in the code. And one of the things that it did was there's a permissioning system in our application that has a function named has permission, and basically says, does this user have access to this permission? And after we had done some Claude Code stuff, I was looking around, and that has permission function had basically been automatically copy pasted into like a whole bunch of different files. And my initial reaction was like, oh, it just doesn't understand ColdFusion. But I was listening to a podcast the other day, and someone was saying, not ColdFusion, this I think was maybe Java or PHP. They were saying that they had the exact same experience, that the AI was basically copy pasting functions anywhere it was needed. And so it became a kind of a skilling up of the prompting, and they had to go into their like what Claude.md file equivalent and say, hey, if there's a function that looks like it's available in the application, never duplicate it in any of the code that you're writing, just reference it. So you have to figure out where it goes off the rails, and then you have to figure out what prompt sort of brings it back into a constrained space.
Exactly.
I mean, you're talking to a junior engineer. That's very similar to a conversation you could have with a junior engineer. Like, oh, you know what? There's a better way to do this. You don't have to copy that code.
Right.
Yeah. And none of these agents are at a point where they can give you something the first shot. You know, we're just not there yet. So expect to iterate 2-3 times until you get what you want.
Yeah.
The experience and the frustration level is going to be, how can you automate that iteration? And I've actually experienced, and I've explained, described some of this for Ben. I've been able to get it to use one of these MCP servers, which is called Puppeteer. So it basically can now look at a browser and drive a browser. So given that, it can run the application. I can tell it to write something for me. I can have it check if any errors were thrown, and I can have it iterate on it or run the test suite and iterate on the test suite. So I can get it into these feedback loops where I say, iterate until there's no more errors. And it'll just do that and then come back and say, okay, after 4 or 5 times. And I can sit there and watch the browser and see, oh, it's scrolling down, or it's clicking on this. Oh, it generated a Lucy error, or it generated a application dialog that says an error occurred, or something like that. And it'll sit there and iterate, and then it'll say, okay, I think I got it now.
It's pretty cool.
And I think we will get to a point where we don't have to go through like 6-7 iterations before it gets there. We'll be able to, and part of that is we'll get better at instructing it and asking it what to do, and it will get better at translating that into the code base that we've told it to live in.
And if I could bring this back to Wheels as a wrap up, because this went into me and now it needs to come out of me. One of the really cool things about Wheels is that it ships with the documentation, and if you annotate the functions that you write as part of the application, Wheels will automatically bake that documentation into its own documentation. So if I add functions that someone looks at and they're not familiar with where they're coming from, they can just go to the documentation, look them up, and Wheels will tell it that it's a custom function that's part of the application logic and what area of the application it's been defined in. So talking about coming at something from a junior mindset, that's been really helpful. I mean, all day I have my application in one tab, browser tab, and I have the documentation in the next tab. I'm constantly going back and forth trying to remember how things work and where they're defined and what arguments they take and what's optional, et cetera, et cetera. But that was very cool. I've never seen a framework do that before.
Well, very cool. Well, Peter, thank you for joining us. I'll
Sure.
kind of allow Ben to recycle his water. But I am excited to kind of see the future of Wheels, where it goes, the 3.0 launch with the CLI, and even if you guys take up that idea of taking someone's application and converting it to show people, I think that'll be because there are a lot of these legacy apps, and to show them, hey, you know what, we can get it super quick into at least the framework, and then over time you can move your stuff over, but short term you can start using the framework right away. Yep. I think it'd be a powerful thing to kind of show people that potential, and that'll allow them to get on board fast without having to think they have to redo everything right away.
Nice.
All right. Well, Peter, again, thank you very much. Ben, as always, thank you. I know we went into some other directions, but it's all interesting stuff that I think the development community is interested about, and I'm sure we'll get into more of these conversations about AI, and maybe even have Peter demo some of his stuff that he's creating. That'd be amazing. All right, everyone, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Cheers.
Cheers.